you mentioned that you some way had some sort of passion for taking research into product.
Yes.
Could you please elaborate on that?
So I think, especially now, I think this is a trend that I really hope that would be a focus in ML communities in the next couple of years, at least, because there's a lot of resources out there that you can just existing models. There is a lot of people fresh
libraries, frameworks.
Exactly. And
go nuts.
And then fresh graduates from school that maybe their knowledge is sometimes might be more up to date than a lot of people that they are in industry in this field, right? But you sometimes miss these key questions of what am I building this for? Am I optimizing? So if I build a super complex model and then I put it in production, and by the way, this data that you trained your model with, in a streaming data, that doesn't exist, or they are very different and measured differently with a different frequency.
So a theoretical research concept doesn't really fly when you really want to put it in production.
Yeah, or you want to have it's a matter of latency, for instance. And then the other thing is that you optimize for precision and recall, accuracy, and then you put that in production, and the metric that you need to satisfy is user engagement. How do you map, when you are training, try out tons of different models, how do you map the metrics that you have looked
metrics
at to the metric that you want to optimize in production? Mm-hmm. And then the other part is that very often product people have an idea of what they want to build. Still, there is a lot of iterations that you need to make to translate that to what data, what metrics, what model, what problem. Then you can start looking at things. And I think that's a challenge that I like us to do. And I spend a lot of time and I'm passionate about, especially around metrics.
But I think even going back to, I worked with Vattenfall for several years. Mm-hmm. And I remember a war story that, the head of strategy, one in the export members, he wanted to talk to me at some kind, and so he gave me sort of 5 minutes. Okay, what's the problem? Why can't we move faster? And thinking on the spot like this, and I basically blurped out, from nowhere. I think it's the business to data and analytics translation, which is the whole problem for us to get started. I mean, the business people in their domain has so little knowledge around what this can be done. So how we translate this into the problem that is solvable with data and AI is number one. Yeah. And the more I think about this and the more experienced I have become, I see this more and more. And this, I think you are now pushing this even further, that this is really tricky. If we really want to do AI in production, because if you really do it all the way down, feature engineering, metric setting, etc., it's huge. Yeah. It's really tricky.
I think it comes from different sides as well. It's it's very often you have engineering team building something for you, and then I'm I want to put my model in production, and this engineering infrastructure that you are giving me has zero flexibility for that. So you need an interaction with engineers. Then you also have the product of really what's sometimes they come and say, I want to have prediction of X. Or can you improve X? And then you need to dig in what actually they mean. Might be you can do something much simpler. And very often people don't think about the maintenance cost of machine learning models. And you need to think of how much maintenance I bring into this team that doesn't have enough knowledge of maintaining a machine learning model. And how much explainability do they need to feel comfortable using that model. I remember in Spotify, I worked on a project that we wanted to shorten the time that we run an A/B test on new users. And we were discussing of can we, instead of looking for a longer term, look at shorter term and predict that. we started looking at very complex. I personally started looking at complex models to start with, and then you start talking with product owners, and you realize that what they actually want is that if I am going to use this, I need to know if I turn this knob, how much the other thing changes. So they feel comfortable with using this as a decision-making tool. And then we ended up making a much simpler model with my colleague.
Usability was more important than anything else, maybe.
Explainability.
Understandability for the user.
Exactly.
I mean, I remember this very well as well from that time. And it's kind of funny. Sometimes you can think about that project as either a very, high successful outcome or actually a failure in some sense, because we didn't need the ML model to start with.
Yeah.
But I would say, and let me know what you think about this, but I think it's a very, the best outcome you can almost think about for a machine learning project, because we had a number of features or input signals that we could measure. We didn't know really what affected the target that we had.
Yeah.
But we needed to model that somehow, used machine learning, could get some kind of feature importance for that. And so, one of them is super strong. Why don't we just remove the rest and just use this one as a single metric?
Yeah.
And then we didn't need to train a model. We can easily put it in production and we can understand it very, very easily.
Yeah.
But still, without having taken the step to go through that and measure that with machine learning, we wouldn't have known that in a scientific sense, right?
I totally agree. This is where you need, this is the part I said, you need an ML research, where you know how to structure the problem. You look at it, you build a model, you look at the feature importance, you do look at a lot of importance factors. And then, but you also need this mentality of at the end, where am I putting this? So you have the applied ML hat, and then
what do I really need?
Yeah, exactly.
Bottom line, what do I really need to solve this?
Yeah, at the end, I agree. It was in a sense, being so excited as a researcher is a failure, but also I think
from a business perspective, it's beautiful.
It gets out and they are using it, then I feel also very excited.
But just continuing a bit about new maintenance of ML and people, so many people I think in AI only build prototypes and it never reach production or some product or some use or value for the company in some way. And you have done that a number of times. Well, have you seen this as well? That so many people think just having trained a model and seen that some accuracy score is enough, and then what's left really, you would say, to actually have that integrated in some product or some system? I think
there is one factor that is a much larger. If you prefer, we can talk about it later. And that's the human factor. It's if your decision maker is on board to support you and fund your project, and also sponsoring the project, and also have the openness of trying machine learning and understand that you can't have a normal a Jira system that you have daily deliveries and there is a requirement of iteration for machine learning. If you have those pieces in place, that's the most important piece for the success of a machine learning.
So elaborate on that. So from, I think I understand it, but maybe I didn't understand it. There's a difference in the fundamental DevOps process for software engineering to machine learning ops. Yeah. So the cycles and how you need to understand the differences to fit them together. Is that what you said? Or please elaborate if I misunderstood.
So this was even before getting to a point that you're building. So yes and no. So the first thing is that you need a team that basically understands, or a decision maker that understands to set out a longer timeline.
Yes.
And to your point, why this longer timeline is needed, Google has a nice article about actually what is the differences between a traditional software development and a machine learning development.
Which one is that, the hidden technical depth thing, or which paper is?
After hidden tech, there is another one. I forgot the name. It actually compares and also shows how you can score machine learning projects.
Okay. So about testing in machine learning.
Something like that. I just don't remember the name.
Okay.
So when you have machine learning, so there's a lot of certainty around software engineering. in machine learning, there is no certainty about, like, for instance, you have a lot of randomness in your data, and you need to like test out for like quality of your data. You need to test about feature importance of your data, and then you need to monitor in a different way, and you also need a lot of extra analysis to understand these uncertainties when you're building your model. So the cycles in terms are different. And then even before getting to this was assuming that you have a model in production, right? But even before that, just the example that Anders and I were discussing, that project, it was not like a one-day work. It was like a more than one day work. Like even to get like to the first iteration, you get an insight about data. So sometimes data exploration is undersold. People think it's easy, just have a look at data, but that is actually maybe like 2-3 weeks of work for some cases. So that's what I meant. If you get that,
if the top management buys into this, number one, to be committed to support and understand that this is a different cycle. Yeah,
but then talking about like these last pieces of like taking machine learning to production. In the last project I worked in Spotify, we worked on like cold start problem and like building recommendation system for that. We spent like a month working on defining.
So just to explain to people, cold start basically is when you have very little data about the song or a user, and you want to still be able to recommend that in some way.
So like user just signs up and you don't know anything about the taste of user, and you want to build still some recommendation to the user. So you want to provide recommendation system on that. I spent like I think a month on understanding our data, our model, and like I because I was a data science product before, I had this good understanding of the metrics, and doing a lot of predictive models and feature mapping to figure out how things correlate to each other to define a metric offline that is a good proxy for the online performance. Then I felt more confident that, okay, now I can put this in production and test it, and most likely it's successful.
So why do you want to have it offline and not simply use the online? Obvious question, but still for the people. Yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, you don't want to test very bad performing model on your users. I mean, you want to respect user experience. So that's the key piece, right?
And also the cost of
there is
building
a high
maybe tests and products and
exactly. There is a high cost of just you put something in production, you need to build a lot of monitoring system around it and scheduling and there's a high cost of maintaining that model even if you leave it live for 2 weeks, right? And it needs to have certain standard. We wanted to test our models before. Just in the prototyping phase before we get to the high quality software standards to see, okay, this is the right choice and we go in this path.
Cool. So there is a lot of things to, for one, just, you do data exploration, you perhaps build some prototype, just train the model and trying to see some value from that, but then actually putting in production, and you have a lot of steps to do there. And then you have a lot of maintenance as well. Just making sure it continues to work, I guess.
Yeah. I think for maintenance, one thing that people forget is that every single feature that you throw at your model means that you also need to maintain a lot of underlying tables that are actually building that particular that feature comes from. So that means that not only introducing maintenance of your model, introducing maintenance to this particular data and the sequence of all the things that this depends on. So people forget that this is actually a hidden cost to consider.
So not only models, but all the data dependencies and all the data pipelines and everything. I guess Spotify had like 10,000 pipelines running every day or something. How many do you think King has? It's probably a lot, right?
It's a lot of data. Yeah, I think around same scale. It's just different type of data.
And let's talk a little bit about the difference and how you see the view of. We have talked now going to production, so we can talk about the vertical going to production, like vertical, really not going to inside, but putting it in a system for a user. What about the horizontal scaling, to having many different pipelines or having many different algorithms in place? Mm-hmm. That's another dimension of scaling, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, so for instance, now in my team, we, like the particular example that I said about playtesting, and having a bot for playtesting, we had a bot that was trained by applying supervised learning. So you look at the user data, you train the model to be able to predict, given the current state of the game, what would be the next action, like what choice of matching the user does in Candy. Then we started saying that, okay, if you want to do research, you want to also know how does the random bot performs. Then we started saying that, okay, we want to try out reinforcement learning once. You start like scaling and trying out a lot of different models, and then you see, and then while you are trying, like the whole game is moving and like, advancing, a lot of new content is coming, and then you need to retrain your bot. So you get a lot of these challenges of you need to scale. So you need a lot of automation. So we spent, I think, not like, full time, but like we spent like 6 months of time on building infrastructure, where we can plug in a lot of different models. We can scale if the number of game designers that they are using this tool is like it's suddenly increasing. We can scale the number of trials that we have, and we can automate the process of using data from users and the changes of the game. So I think it was the time well spent, because now it makes it much easier for us to iterate on what we do and have a better maintenance.
But then I must ask you, do you and King have a clearly defined use case life cycle? From an idea of what you want to ideate that we should do this, there is a business guy saying, a product owner saying something, it goes into research, ideation, validation. Do you have a clear path?
I wish we get to that clear path. So I think we are still not as mature we don't have as many big use. Like if you get to a company that you have several use cases, like 100 use cases, then you get to this, like you need to establish that. What I have been doing when I joined King was to establishing a research framework where I listed a set of questions where if you want to start a machine learning project, you need to answer those. Where, like, what is your data? What is the business method?
AI canvas.
Exactly. Inspired from AI canvas very much. And like my experience in few companies that I worked in. That highlights where you need to talk to whom and what kind of, in order to start that project, what kind of skill sets you need for that project and when, so that you can set out a project. And we help, like my team helps, if a project is an external thing, helps them, the teams to look at that. But if you think about use cases and life cycle, again, like we don't have as mature cycles, but usually it needs to come from, if it doesn't come from our team, an idea of proof of concept that we showcase, it should come from a need of the business. And usually there is some data science work that has happened around it. So there's insights about data, how much of an opportunity is, why we think machine learning can have impact. Then we have two formats. One is that we do a consulting. So data scientists in game teams, they work on machine learning projects and we support them in terms of research, and they look at data and so on. Another one is that we start building something in my team, which we know that it's more complex and it takes longer period.